all need to make smart decisions with our money. The Long-Term Investor podcast shows you how by distilling complex financial matters into easily digestible lessons. And now, here's your host, Chief Investment Officer at PlanCorp and the author of Making Money Simple, Peter Lazaroff.
Welcome back to The Long-Term Investor. In this episode, I'm joined by Jack Rains, author of Young Money, for a conversation about what happens when traditional financial advice focuses too heavily on accumulating money and not enough on using it well. We discuss why time may be a more valuable asset than money, how the FIRE movement gets it wrong, how to distinguish uncertainty from genuine risk, and why a good life may be best measured by the memories and moments of nostalgia created along the way. As always, you can find detailed show notes at thelongterminvestor.com. And as a reminder, I have a book of my own coming out. There's a link at the top of the episode description where you can sign up for exclusive updates, promotions, subscriber-only webinars, and all other sorts of great stuff. That email comes out every other Saturday. It is different than my normal email. So again, there's a link at the top of the episode description, or you can visit theperfectportfoliobook.com. And now here is my conversation with Jack Rains. Jack Rains, welcome to The Long-Term Investor.
Peter, thanks for having me.
So congrats on the new book, Young Money. I've been following your work for a long time, and I'm hoping we can talk about what I felt like was a big takeaway for me from the book, which is just that like long-term investing is not as necessarily all about just having the largest portfolio. You really dive into how to allocate money, time, opportunities all across different life stages. But let's start with sort of your entry into investing. You tell a story about turning a $6,000 Roth IRA into nearly $400,000 and then losing half of that money from the peak. So maybe tell us a little bit about what that experience taught you about money that anything in terms of making money never could.
The first thing it taught me hilariously is when I had to meet with my accountant, or like my dad's accountant, like the following year, and he was looking at it, he was like, there were like 120 trades in my Roth in like year 2020 that kind of led to that. And his big takeaway was you should never gamble with your retirement account. But I guess if you are going to gamble, if you do it in your retirement account, at least you don't have to worry about taxes. So my like terrible financial advice to everybody is if you're going to speculate, like, I don't think it's horrible with your Roth, because if you do make money, you don't have to figure out capital gains. And then if you lose money, you could literally only lose like that contribution if you're like 23. On the serious note, don't do what I did. But yes, I did. I graduated college in December 2019. Obviously, January 2020, February 2020, COVID happens. I'm working remote, corporate finance, like not in the office, really bored. And I figure out what a SPAC is. And basically, for people who don't know, it's like a shell company that provides an alternative path to going public from a traditional IPO. And I was buying SPACs and SPAC warrants, which are like options. And it was a bubble. I was really good at playing the bubble. I did turn $6,000 into $400,000 in about 9 or 10 months. And then I also, a few months after that, lost $150,000 in about 5 minutes. So I can tell you a lot of things I learned from that. The first is when your dad calls you when you have $400,000 and says you should put it in an index fund, you should probably listen to him. The second one is like, no matter how good and euphoric making money feels, losing a lot of money will make you feel horrible and just like, you just feel like an idiot. Like it's such a just like whack on your sense of like intelligence that I don't know. I've like not really, I still buy some stocks here and there, but I've not actively speculated since, because the emotional roller coaster of just constantly trading stuff in your personal account is just like excruciating. Like it is just like mind-numbingly like all consuming.
You know, I started my career as an individual stock analyst and had a bunch of individual stocks myself. And now my portfolio is just ridiculously simple. It's one fund across all accounts. And there's only been a couple times I started in 2007. So during the financial crisis, a lot of times if you could just buy a company that was priced to go bankrupt and didn't end up going bankrupt, like you made a lot of money. And the only time as an investor I felt like I've seen similar instances was COVID, like 2020. There were, some individual stocks where I resisted the urge to buy. I stayed the course with the boring plan. And had I gone down that route, it's fine to entertain yourself a little, but I think what you kind of call out in the book, and I feel to be true, is like, it's not so much about like the bad trade that lost a lot of money. The bad trade, I think you're arguing often, is like you spend hundreds of hours and you lose sleep over like the decision to trade or not to trade or do something. So like, I guess, how do you know, how does an investor know when investing has stopped really serving your life purpose and more just started consuming it?
It's a framework I use a lot in the book. It's just also like how I think about life in general is like everything is a matter of opportunity cost. And you can like, if you want to go like in a pure investment mindset, there's like, what's the opportunity cost of like this investment versus that one? Like what's your cost of capital, whatever. But it applies to a lot more than money, right? Like what's in the biggest opportunity cost, I think, is like opportunity cost of your time and how you spend that time, because money is a pretty fungible thing at the end of the day. Incomes go up and down, net worth can go up and down, but like time is a constantly depreciating asset. And if you find yourself like spending hours and hours a day, like thinking about stocks, analyzing stocks, and like, it's not a full-time job. Like you're not an like equity research analyst, you're not a hedge fund analyst. This isn't what you do for a living. That both takes away from like other things you could be doing to like enjoy your life. It also takes away from like developing skills that would help you increase your income, which would actually probably cause your net worth to compound over time. Like, I don't know, if you have a portfolio of like $50,000 and you can generate 100,000 or 100% return, great. You make 50 grand. There's probably a lot of things you could have done that would have like led to you being able to increase your income by 50K. That would be a compounding skill set that then continues to grow over time. So I really think it's I'm not going to say you have to only do like one index fund, or like, I'm not going to be the guy to prescribe certain investment philosophies. I do think if it's taking up like the equivalent of a part-time job of your life, time-wise, and you're not managing enough money that it can equate like a part-time job level of like income increase, which probably means millions of dollars in your portfolio, it's probably a poor allocation of time. That's kind of how I think about it. And like I especially for young people, I think it's really tough to realize how big that time suck is until you're several years into it.
I think in financial planning, we're pretty skilled at showing what the future value of a dollar is, but far less skilled in maybe, even those who are skilled, it would be difficult to convey what the future cost of a missed experience would be. You talk about like money is replaceable, time is not. Can you talk a little bit about like sometimes how these the financially sensible choice is still going to carry a large non-financial cost, and like what do people get wrong there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest issues, and again, like I'm speaking as a 29-year-old who has experienced my 20s, right? But like for a lot of young people, your income is probably lower than it'll ever be. Your like uncertainty about the future and just like general nervousness about like being thrown into the real world for the first time is really high. And I think it's pretty easy to fall in the scarcity mindset of, I don't have that much, I need to protect what I have. And like most like traditional financial advice is you should put back something around 15% of your income into savings, into investments to compound. And like, I agree with all that advice. To be clear, like I max out my 401k, I make sure I get the match, I do all that. But if you're making like your 22, 23-year-old salary, and then you have an opportunity to go on a trip with your friends, or even just like go out on a night on the weekend, this like window of opportunity of being a young person with like these fun things that young you wants to do is only a few years. And the cost of having fun, like the amount of dollars it takes to have fun at 23 is actually like a really small amount. So and this might be like counterintuitive advice, I'm much more in the camp of like, it's okay to deviate from like traditional financial planning advice when you're young, as far as like money you allocate to retirement, assuming that like one, the money is actually going to experiences you would find fulfilling, and it's not just like binging on DoorDash or whatever. And two, you don't have a ton of debt. And three, that you think you're on a like high slope career path where earnings will increase. If you aren't pursuing a high income life, that's fine. Like there's more to life than just going after money. But if you're in a job where you make 60K now, but there's a path to 150K in like, 3-4 years, then it's okay to spend a little bit higher percentage of your income when you're making 50K. If you're not, you need to be more thoughtful about that, because like the odds of you being able to like make up those missed contributions later is lower. So it's, all of this is subjective, but it's like a sliding scale of, at the end of the day, like money serves one purpose, and that is to be used on some form of fulfillment, either now or in the future. And you kind of have to ask yourself, like, is that extra $5,000 that I would save at 23 going to be more useful when it compounds for 40 years and I can spend it and it's worth $30,000 or $40,000? Or would I rather spend it now as a 23-year-old? What would 60-year-old me be happier with? Like younger me having spent that money on this thing or keeping it for that thing? Again, it's not black and white, but like, I don't think, again, when it's young, it's really hard to conceptualize how brief youth is. Therefore, it's tough to like convince yourself, especially if you're frugal minded, which is usually a good thing, that it's okay to have fun every once in a while.
There's really good research on how what we think our future self will want is typically wrong, which makes this difficult. And not every dollar earned can be saved, and not every dollar saved can be invested. And so, there's not like a black and white option. You're often trying to like minimize regret. And when you save for the future, you're effectively spending on your future self. But you make one of my favorite lines in the book, and I'm going to like paraphrase here, is that memories compound faster than money. I absolutely love that. I think it really aligns with a lot of what I think philosophically about financial planning. Like what to you does that phrase mean? And maybe who should not follow that advice?
So it's an idea that I borrowed from Bill Perkins. I don't know if you've read Die with Zero, but it's like great book. And he uses a term called memory dividends. And the whole basis behind this, and I like totally agree with his take on this, is that it's pretty easy to understand how money compounds. You can just open Excel, put in $10,000, like 9% growth rate, 40 years. And then I can't do the math in my head on that, but then it's worth like a lot more than $10,000. It's in the like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. Okay. But if you don't ever spend money on memories, then you'll end up being at that same 65, 70 years old, and you have $5-10 million in the bank, and you just didn't, like, you don't have moments of nostalgia to look back on. And I view like what he calls memory dividends, I think is just like future instances of nostalgia for remembering things that you found very enjoyable in the past. And like, by doing interesting, fun stuff with people you care about when you're young, you are giving future you the opportunity to enjoy like reliving those experiences later. And I do think that like the kind of meta thing to be optimizing for in life is like how many really, really like powerful, meaningful moments of nostalgia can you put at the different periods in your life? And when you have one of those moments, it's worth spending money on, right? So the other thing is like, those things just cost way less money when you're young, when you don't have kids or you don't own a home. Like the older you get, the more expensive it is to like create meaningful things because your lifestyle just costs more. You have more dependence. Like your taste and like the hotel you want to stay in at like 42 is going to be different than 22, right? So if you need to throw a few $100 at something to like have fun at 22, you should probably do it. Now, the caveat on that is like, you don't want to put yourself in a really tough spot later. For example, if you're in credit card debt, like ignore all, like everything I'm saying is from the point of like, you're being overly frugal, but you have the ability to spend. If you're in a spot where like you have high interest rate debt, like, no, you shouldn't just be like, you shouldn't max out a credit card to go live, laugh, love in Europe at 25. Like, don't do that. So like for the people who shouldn't do this, it's like, if you're not in a spot financially where I think it's okay to save less when you're really young, but you shouldn't bury yourself in more and more debt. Is kind of where I draw the line. That is actually the one exception I would make on that.
It's interesting as you were talking, and I started searching as you were talking. So last year, Nick Majuli had a book called The Wealth Ladder and created like a spending rule around like, hey, like any given time, 0.01% of your net worth, like you can just spend it. Don't worry about it. And what I started to search for is like, okay, some of these are like, there's a bigger spending rule on when you should splurge. And it's kind of, the idea is similar to yours because you can get in, like memories compound, but you can like financial habits, good financial habits compound too. And you don't want to create an argument for undersaving. And, it's just really tough. I go back to financial planning. You work with a financial advisor and they're going to run like a Monte Carlo for you and figure out what is your probability of running out of money before a certain age. And that whole process is like a balance on a scale of like, we're trying to minimize running out of money versus minimize dying with regret. And like where you fall in the middle can be tricky. And I will say that, so I don't work directly with clients. I haven't for a long time. My role is really just to manage the money at the firm, but I still meet with clients and I see people who are such diligent savers over their lifetime where they just, by the time they're allowed to spend the money, they can't. And so I think there's some benefit here, just to getting in the habit of spending some of your money, of like living your life a little bit. One group, and I'm so happy that I think you and I align here. One group that I sort of am skeptical of is the FIRE movement.
Yep. We are very
aggressive
on that.
saving. Yeah. Like talk tonight. Why don't I not even set you up? Like talk to me about the FIRE movement.
So you mentioned Nick Majuli. I quote him at one point in my book because he has a very good, I forgot what year the stat came from, but basically he has a stat in one of his old blog posts basically saying that like everybody's worried about retirement, but actually, at least in America, most retirees have so much money in savings that they don't even touch the principal before they die, which is like on one hand good because money problems suck. Like there is no worse situation like feeling like you're short on money. I fully get that. But if you're 70 years old and you're spending like $100,000 a year and you have like $8 million in the bank account that's like compounding faster than that, you're just never going to spend that down. It's like there was a more efficient point of spending earlier. Ramit Sethi talks all the time in his podcast about like you have all these like really neurotic people who made a lot of money in tech or finance or whatever, and they were frugal and they just don't know how to spend. I think the FIRE movement is at the core of this whole thing where like the entire point of what the FIRE movement was supposed to be was rooted in good things, and that like you should put yourself in a position that you have the freedom to live the life that you want. But there's a more toxic version that's kind of been co-opted over time that's become this like vilification of the labor force where like you should like minimize all worldly materials to the point that you can opt out of the labor force. And it's like, okay, so if you really buy into that, like take it to the full extreme, right? You take whatever job you have, let's say you're making, let's say like $90,000 a year, and you basically live in the like cheapest apartment that meets your needs, and you eat rice and beans and never hang out with your friends. And the entirety of doing that is just to get you to the point that you can continue to do that without having to have more money coming in. I mean, my take on this is like, you probably just really don't like your job, but you do something else for a living is like I don't know, like, because I can go on a whole tangent on like anti-FIRE movement propaganda.
I mean, please do. I'm pretty anti-FIRE, so you do you. Yeah.
I mean, the other issue with this, and it's something that doesn't get thought about much, is like, with the way FIRE usually plays out for people who are like true disciples, they end up hitting it in probably their like mid to late 30s to early 40s, right? And the issue with that is like then everybody else in your like age band in life is like peak career, working at least 40 hours a week minimum. And it's like, okay, who are you going to hang out with? Like what's your social life? It's either people younger than you that are just figuring stuff out or people like older than you who are retired. So you are now putting yourself in a spot where you're less relatable to like the friends of your kids, you like your friends from college or early career or high school or whatever. You're making less money, which means that like if the market downturns, that actually totally screws up the graph that you made. Like you're putting your entire livelihood in the hands of market forces while also alienating yourself from everybody else that was previously like around your lifestyle. I don't know. It's just like I did a whole spend a year, we can talk about this more in a minute, but like backpacking Europe and Latin America for a year in my early 20s. It was kick-ass. It was awesome. I would come across the occasional like late 30s drifter in Argentina, and it's just like, dude, this is not like, I don't want to end up like, I don't care how free you feel, like this is not good. What you get is an extreme example, but it's just like, I think people underrate how good it is to be in like a life phase that's like relatable to other people around your age. If everybody around your age is working and you just feel like you have to get out of the labor force, there's probably not anything wrong with the labor force. There's just something wrong with your relationship to it. So just like change jobs, like take a sabbatical for a year and then go do something else. But I don't know. Like people are meant to do stuff. Like we're not supposed to just subsist.
Yeah, I think a life without purpose is harder to find fulfillment and like contentment. And I'm not saying you can't have purpose without a job. A lot of the FIRE movement feels like people just like pick up odd jobs here and there. They're like, I don't really work, but then they're like an Uber driver because they have to have like some money coming in. Or, I think in general, I don't think a lot of the audience here are part of the FIRE movement, but I think, sometimes it comes from a place of like, okay, I don't like my job, but also some people in the healthier frame won't spend. So like less FIRE movement, but more frugalness to an extreme, in part because they worry about like uncertainty. And people, depending on when you entered the workforce, can really like shape your view around risk and uncertainty. Like, yeah, I came in 2007. So one could argue, like, especially into an industry but I mean, I knew lots of people who went into banking and just lost job after job from 07 through 09. Me, I was at a financial advisory firm and people needed us more than ever. And I was just like, oh, this must be what a normal bear market is like. And every bear market has felt super boring since, admittedly. But I just think often, people face uncertainty and not actual risk. You talk a little bit about this, and it's a little pivot off of FIRE, but like, where is that distinction useful, as well as like, where does it break down?
Yeah, I mean, uncertainty and risk is interesting because they feel the exact same. Like they're both this, you get this feeling of like anxiety because you just don't know what the outcome is going to look like. What differentiates them is like, what are the actual consequences of the downside case? And the example that I give in the book is like, I have this chapter where it's like a hypothetical scenario comparing like 25-year-old you and 40-year-old you. And like, if the worst case thing happens, which could be like losing your job, losing a lot of money. If you're 25, living with a couple of roommates, your burn rate is like probably a few $1,000s a month. Like, they're just like, your rock bottom really isn't that low, right? Like people it will feel bad, it'll suck, but you can find another job. People are willing to bet on the young person if they're high energy. Like you don't have that much money saved up that you're going to burn through. It's like you can just scrape by and figure it out. If you're 40 and you have a mortgage and like your kid's in private school and you have a couple of cars and you quit a like high paying job where you haven't built up a nest egg to go like start a startup or like do something a lot higher risk and it doesn't work, you have like serious problems. Like it's very much just related to like, what is your like lifestyle? What are your lifestyle costs? But the reason that I make that differentiation in the book is just like, I think a lot of young people are really risk averse when like the downside case of basically any career decision is actually, at least from a financial standpoint, just not that high. And there's a lot of things that might have lower short-term payouts that have really powerful right tails, whether it's joining a startup that ends up doing well or like pursuing an entrepreneurial endeavor where even if you don't make a lot of money, you learn a ton that you can bring that experience with you to the next thing where you're more senior and you do make more money, right? Where if you hyper fixate on, if I leave investment banking for something that's like a $70K a year pay cut, that's a massive drop. And like maybe, but what if it sets you up better 10 years down the road, right? Like it could be worth it versus if you're spending just tens of thousands of dollars a month on your lifestyle, you might physically not be able to afford that jump because if it doesn't work, you have serious problems. Like the numbers don't number. The thing to think about really, and it is somewhat, I think, again, so much of this is like life stage related. Like single in your 20s, you has a much different like risk curve than like mid 40s, a lot of expenses now and in the future. But the thing to think about is like, what does the worst case scenario actually look like for me if I make a given decision? And like, am I just nervous because I don't know what will happen? Or am I nervous because if the bad thing happens, bad things happen to me?
It's something that you face really through any stage of life. I think when you're younger, the stakes seem higher, like because there's infinite futures. And if you walk down a path, you're like, well, what if I get stuck down this path and that other path would have been better? And as a result, had been farther along with whatever the goal is, career path, like money choice, whatever it is. You kind of talk at one point about the book where like sometimes people feel stuck when there are multiple reasonable choices there, and you suggest living life backwards. Maybe you could walk us through that exercise.
Yeah, I mean, it's and again, I have a propensity to like go from like, I think introspection is really good. I think rumination is self-destructive. I'm someone who like can get in my head a lot and like slide from the good one to the bad one. So like this is something that like I've struggled with and had to work through myself. But like a few years ago, I was like 24. I'm basically just trying to figure out what I want to do with my life, what matters. Like didn't love my job, knew I was going to grad school, didn't know what I wanted to do after it. And I ended up speaking with this guy, Dr. Jim Jackson. He was a former Baptist pastor at a small town where my grandparents grew up, then at a big church in Houston. Now he's like an executive coach and does a few different business things, but he's great. And he had talked to people like much more senior and important than me about much bigger problems than I was having. So he was like a very like thoughtful voice of reason for just like grounding like an angsty 24-year-old kid a little bit. But the one thing he like was telling me that really stuck with me was it was his framework for like living life backwards. And basically, it's aligned with how I put like life is very stage specific, but really thinking through like what things do you want to do in life? Like what are the just absolute, like I'm not willing to die before I have done these things or these things have happened to me? And then what order of operations do you need to like put your actions to make that happen? So the like short-term example was I really romanticized the idea of like taking a crazy trip, backpacking the world, like hostel hopping. And it was the type of thing where I had an interesting window where I was 24. I was going to grad school in a year. Like I didn't know what the future was going to look like. But at that point I was single. I had grad school locked. I had like, even after up and down on the stock market, enough money saved up that like I wasn't going to be on the street. Like I was okay spending some money. And that was a thing that I wanted to do. And if I didn't do it then, it's like the career implications or relationship implications of just like doing that 3 years later probably wouldn't work. I might not even want to do it then. Like, but there would just be way more like confounding factors versus at 24, like it was kind of like, if I want to do this thing and like have these experiences, I sort of have to do it right now. And by thinking about my life across like a full timeline of like, what will each stage look like? It just gave me a lot of clarity on this is a like short-term thing that if I don't do it, this window of opportunity probably closes. Some of the longer term stuff, like I think it's like very good to want to be wealthy. I'm not somebody with like vilify the desire to like make a good living. That was going to be a thing that was going to come after graduate school for me. Like most of my career stuff that was going to matter was going to be post MBA. And I was aware of that. So that was a thing where, okay, I should take business school seriously and like think through like career stuff coming out of that. But nothing I do now pre-business school is really going to like move the needle that much, my lifetime earnings based off of just where I was. So that just shouldn't be the thing. I should not be optimizing for making an additional $50,000 at 24. I should optimize for where am I going to be at 30 post MBA. So it's just like, it just like forces clarity because when you like live life backwards, it makes time the variable that you have to like measure everything against. And it also forces you to cut like very, very, very objectively on, you can't just, once you have like the finite timeline on paper, you can't sit there and think, oh, I'll get to this someday or I'll do that at some point. It's like, no, like you could do this now or you could do it then. But if you just don't actually map out like when this thing in your life could happen, it's not going to. And you can't do everything. Like it is a just very powerful, like forcing exercise for stack ranking, like what things matter in which phases of life. Okay, prioritize those, drop the other stuff.
It does require that you are aware of like what your values are or what is important to you. I mean, any thoughts on like, you talk a little bit about like, if you've borrowed a preference from your peer group. And I think some of that comes into play, particularly if you're like status chasing, like how should people think about that?
So I think everybody chases, like everybody is susceptible to status games. I don't really think it's an avoidable thing because humans are social creatures and we are constantly comparing, like you're constantly silently measuring yourself up against those around you. And those around you could be people in your office, people in your community. The biggest problem with the internet is that like you can compare yourself against hypothetically anyone who exists, right? Which is like really annoying. And that's I think that's actually the biggest struggle for young people today is like internet-based and facade-infused status games where you are seeing a version of other people who you deem to be like around your age group doing better than you or doing more interesting stuff than you. And it's like everybody's susceptible to it. Like there's a version of like maybe there's a version of me that's looking at some other 29-year-olds who like locked in on the finance path out of school and like have made more money over the last 6 years. Or the person who took an entrepreneurial bet at 25, grinded for 3 years, and they sold their company for a lot of money. There's also people who did that, who made a decent amount of money, but not enough to actually like jump ship and do something else who are like, man, why didn't I go do something more fun in my like early to mid 20s, right? So there's like I don't think there's anybody out there who has like, there probably are a few people out there, but like, I think 99% of people, like there's somebody somewhere that they're jealous of some version of their life, right? The thing that I think is very helpful for mitigating status games is in young adulthood, like giving yourself the opportunity to have a pretty wide range of experiences to try a few different things. And the reason for that is like when you're 20 or 21 and you're deciding your career, you have such a like narrow worldview on like what you want to do. And it's probably a pattern match based off of some combination of where you grew up and like what your parents did or the parents around you, like what either looked fun or high earning from that worldview, what the kids around you in college are doing that therefore pushes you to do a particular thing, whether it's finance, law, software engineering, you're just pattern matching your peers, or right after you graduate from school, like early adulthood, you're 22, 23, and you make maybe one pivot based off of what you see, like your experience of that one job and what you see people like 5 years down the road doing. The truth is like the economy is so, and by economy, like job market is so variable. Like if you would have become a ML researcher 10 years ago, there actually wasn't that much money in that compared to like software engineering or like investment banking. And now there's like machine learning researchers making like tens of millions of dollars a year. Like you actually don't know what's going to pop off as the thing that wins. So I think the best thing you can do is like gather a lot of experiences and just figure out what really piques your interest and is worth digging in on. And like, once you find work that you actually find interesting and compelling, status games it's not, I don't think they ever fully go away, but if you get some level of internal fulfillment from the like ways you're spending your time, you become a lot less concerned about like prestige or money, right? As long as your basic needs are met, you can put some money back, you like the work, you're just going to be less distracted by the other stuff. It's when you are fully determining like the thing I'm doing by financial outcome or like status outcomes off of that, it's very fickle and you'll find yourself very unsettled because you're going to be competing in a domain. Like if, for example, if you go to work for a hedge fund because it's the path to a lot of money and like that's, you watch Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, you watch The Wolf of Wall Street, you're like, you go to Wall Street. Okay. There's going to be people who actually really geek out on like earnings reports, 10Ks, financial modeling, who are just going to kick your ass. And if you're just doing it for the money and other people who are earning the same money, but they like the money, but they're really doing it because like this is just a game they like playing and want to win, you're just going to get smoked. So you're going to put yourself in a spot where you won't win that status game because you're competing against people who actually just don't care about the status aspect of it. They're just at it because they really like enjoy that thing. They're good at it. They're going to grind at it. And like, it doesn't feel like a grind for them because they just geek out on it. You're not going to win that. So then you're going to end up in a spot where like you might make some money, but you don't like how you're spending your time. And you're going to be worse at it than people who really like it. So that was a really long-winded way of saying having like a pretty wide breadth of experiences when you're young, just like exposes you to more opportunities to find a thing that you're into that you can double down on. And importantly, it also exposes you to the idea that like you actually can change paths if you aren't into the thing that you're doing. Like if you stay in one thing too long, inertia sets in and it just becomes like, it's like a mental block to move. It's paralyzing. If you've never changed your life, how do you then decide to change your life at like 32 versus you make a couple of jumps in your 20s? It's never easy, but you know you've done it, right? It's like anything else. Once you've done a thing, you know how to do that thing.
And I'm with you, by the way. Like the more experiences you have, the broader the circle of people that you build relationships with, like the more perspective you have. And it just like I think it's just human nature to, whether it's chase status or always want more. I mean, that's like why we've evolved. That's why we innovate. Like as a species, it's sort of why being a long-term investor is important because you're sort of betting on the human race always wanting more and wanting to be better. And maybe not everybody is that way, but in aggregate, our species is. That's sort of how we've gotten here. And there doesn't have to be anything wrong with that. But what you kind of mentioned, I like the hedge fund example because at the end of the book, you have this like, am I having fun yet sort of mentality where, you know, you have to actually like some of the things you're doing to be successful. Like when you were a backpacker in your early 20s, I mean, that could be true, but same, like you mentioned, you bumped into someone who was maybe in their 30s and kind of like lost in life and you're like, come on, like, let's do something. I mean, am I having fun yet? That's a pretty important angle to think about your life, whether you're 50 or 20 or maybe even retired.
I just think the definition of fun changes with like where you are in life. Like the thing that you'll find fun at 23 is going to be different from 29, different from 35, different from 42. And like things I found fun when I was like in my early 20s, it was like cheap thrills, going out with friends. Like I played football in college. It's like you're kind of hungover and then you have practice in the morning, then you're joking about it with your friends after, whatever. Like the idea of like going out on a Wednesday night right now and then having like a 6 a.m. workout, just getting screamed at by a street coach is actually like my personal hell. But it was like pretty entertaining as like a 20-year-old. And like that's like a very like specific like funny example, but it is true, right? Like your like taste of enjoyment changes. And I think that like career achievement becomes like a sense of like fun and pride and joy. In your 30s, where if you like are maintaining that early 20s lifestyle, like a decade later, you're going to feel like you're falling behind other people and you're going to be stressed, right? So I always feel like, I don't think stress is a bad thing, but fun is almost the like antithesis of like anxiety-induced stress. So if you don't feel like and fun is not the opposite of working hard. I actually think like hard work is basically a requirement for like any sense of fulfillment in life, regardless of if it's like actually your career or like passion projects on the side or your education or your relationships. Like things that matter deserve to be like treated with that reverence. But I think everybody has a pretty strong like internal compass for like how they should be spending their time. And like the signal that points that compass in the right way is like if you're having fun or getting fulfillment out of like the things that are filling your time. If the answer is no, that's probably a screaming sign that you should be doing something else. If the answer is yes, then keep on keeping on.
Well, let me close with this. If listeners or viewers were going to ask themselves a question this weekend to determine like whether their money and time are serving the life they actually want, like what is that question?
I think it goes back to the what I said earlier about like nostalgia. Like I really think money and time are just like two different variables that bake into like money is just like one input that goes into how you're spending your time. And like you should be leveraging money with your time to create moments that you look back on with nostalgia is like the only thing that matters. So like that's kind of my like core like philosophy on life. And if you look at it that way, the thing to ask yourself is like, are you leveraging your money to do that with your life now? Like, is your life aligned where like you're creating those types of moments now? And are you putting yourself in a position that where you can continue to do that over, the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? If the answer is yes, then like, great. If the answer is no, then you have a spending or saving or life direction problem should be addressed, right? I don't know. I think people should be nostalgia maxing, to borrow some Gen Z slang.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, like, look, if you have a good life, it probably means you've made the most of each life stage with different memories and moments. Jack, this has been great. Obviously, people should order your book, Young Money. They can follow you at your newsletter, but maybe tell them more directly. If you're watching us on Cheddar or on YouTube, like, Jack, how are people going to find you?
The book is Young Money by Jack Rains. So definitely pre-order that, order that. I don't know exactly when the episode's dropping. But
so this is coming live like a few days beforehand. So everyone go pre-order. Pre-orders really help authors out. So like, phenomenal. Let's do it.
Pre-order the book.
If you're catching this 2 weeks in, then sure, go ahead and order it. But you might as well pre-order.
Whenever you're listening to it, go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever and like buy Young Money by Jack Rains. As far as where else to find me, my blog is also Young Money, youngmoney.co. So if you type in Young Money by Jack Rains, you will find my book and my newsletter or blog very easily. Other places to find me, biggest sites are Twitter or X, formerly known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. Every social media platform, Jack Rains. I have a cowboy hat on in my profile picture. Easy to recognize. So yeah, give me a follow, give me a read, leave a review, especially if you hate the book. Good review, bad review, whatever. Just all engagement's good engagement.
Well, this was a lot of fun, Jack. Really enjoyed the book. I've enjoyed following you for several years, so appreciate your time. And for everybody else watching, listening, thanks as always. And until next time, to long-term investing.
Thanks for listening to the Long-Term Investor Podcast. To access free financial resources and submit questions to be answered on the show, visit thelongterminvestor.com. Peter Lazaroff is an employee of PlanCorp and BrightPlan. All opinions expressed by Peter and any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of PlanCorp or BrightPlan. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of PlanCorp and BrightPlan may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.